Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do something a little different. One of my favorite hobbies and one of the ways my life just revolves around things is hunting season. I'm an avid big game hunter and I recently won a contest on a really cool program called Hunt League. Check it out, I'll put a link in the descriptions below. I won the Outdoorsman of the Year award, which included a brand new rifle of choice, and so I picked a Seekins Precision Havoc Element, and it is just such a sweet little rifle. It's an ultralight mountain rifle with a carbon composite stock, really short barrel, and it only weighs 5.5 pounds, chambered in 6 PRC. So everything is great about it except for that I happen to be built a little bit like a human praying mantis, and that length of pull on that rifle is very short at 13 inches. And before you get ahead and start telling me why, I understand. They build their rifles to fit people that are average size, and really most people do not need a 14, 15 inch length of pull, and 13 inches is really the right sweet spot to square up on your rifle. However, with those, with my long arms and long neck, it's a lot to cramp into a short stock. So I'm going to show you guys what that looks like compared to my prior hunting rifle, which I'll still use for other things, the Tikka T3X, and what I'm going to do about that to make it fit my long, lanky body a little bit better. So stick around. So here are the two rifles. The top is the Tikka T3X, and that's chambered in a 300 Winchester short magnum. This lower one is the Seekins Element. I don't have the scope on it yet. I did do just a general short mount, like just a loose mount, just to see where things lined up on the rail here. And that's how I was able to square up and realized I needed to put a length of pull spacer in the stock. Now you can see the tape measure here, and it's right about 13 inches, which for most people, that's actually probably the sweet spot. And some people even need shorter for the correct type of shooting. You can see my Tikka is about 14 inches, so it's about an inch longer. That being said, when I put my scope on there, which I'll get to in a minute, it's a Vortex Razor LHT 4.5 to 22. It's a little bit longer than my Leupold VX5 here. So it did kind of also give me the requirement of needing a little more space there. I did square it up here with my rings spaced far apart like that. That's how I like to do it for more stability. And it just seemed like I needed a little bit more space, especially when I'm laying in prone. I felt like I had to pull this against my shoulder in order for me to be even touching it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into the carpentry here in a minute, but you can see definitely could use a little bit of length since this one fits me perfect. Let's get this one dialed in. Now, all I really should have to do to pull this off is put a Phillips screwdriver in there. Usually it's a Phillips, but I did break out some Allen wrenches just in case it's an Allen. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to get a Phillips in there and pull those two screws out in that patch. Sure enough, it needs an Allen. Knowing Seekins, it's 100% American made in-house, so I'm gonna use my standard wrenches, probably a 3/16. Oh, guessed it first try. There we go. These should be pretty easy to source at the local Ace Hardware. I'll buy them 5/8 of an inch longer because that is the size of the spacer I'm going to be putting in there. And you can see we have our stock here. It's kind of a nice design. It's very soft and squishy in there. It looks like they put some extra thought into that design and the stock there. Now, what we're going to be doing is using a flush trim router bit set, and you'll get to see that in a minute. And ideally, you'd have a really nice hard surface like the stock to press against, but with how long this is, the stock is long. If I was to flush trim using the stock, I just feel like I'm going to get my angles wrong, and it's going to be a lot easier to maneuver this. The problem with this is it's squishy. And so what I'm going to do, instead of going into this final piece of material, I'm going to actually build like a dummy spacer with some MDF, which is the material that these rifles are sitting on. And it's pretty easy to cut with the router. It mills very easily, so I shouldn't have to push really hard on this. And then, you know, the goal is to not make any indentations. The other thing I want to point out here is that this is perfectly sized to the stock. And this final spacer that I need to make also needs to be perfectly sized. So I don't want to make a cutout that is exactly that size, because then I need to sand it to make it smooth and flush. And in the case of the spacer I'm making out of carbon, it's gonna need some extra sanding to make it nice and shiny. So what I'm gonna do is make the piece a little larger than this, and I'm gonna show you how to do that right. What I have in my hand here is a roll of masking tape. This is the frog tape. It measures at 1/100 of an inch per two pieces. I folded that over. And so you're looking at 5/1000 of an inch per pass. I'm gonna say that each sanding pass is probably gonna take off an average of 1/100 of an inch. Granted, the more coarse grits I go with are gonna take off more than the fine grits, but I'm gonna go ahead and say we're gonna start with like probably about a 120, and we're gonna double grit as we go. So a 120, a 220 or 240, a 500, and then 1,000. So that should be 4 different passes and then a polish. So what I wanna do is probably 8 wraps of Scotch tape around this, and that's going to make this piece 8/100ths of an inch wider than the stock. And that way when I sand it down through all those passes, it should line up just like the pad does right now. And in case you're wondering, why am I not just using MDF, or I have a whole wood shop full of wood, I could use wood, I'm using carbon. Well, I don't know. It's just such a pretty rifle, and I know I'm only gonna save probably an ounce, but this carbon I found, you'll have to see it. It's still in the mail when you'll see it towards the end of the video once I get to that. It has a glow in the dark strip in it, which I think is just a nice style point, and maybe it'll help me find that rifle in the dark when I'm getting ready for a hunt. Quick side note, guys, this video cannot be monetized because yes, it apparently is offensive to some to even modify the length of pull on a hunting rifle to ensure that you have an ethical shot and take the animal down without suffering. So please take a minute, subscribe, like the channel, and post comments. It does help me, and it allows me to help monetize my other videos that are actually monetizable. Keep watching, and thanks for tuning in. Tape wasn't sticking, so I just wiped it down with some rubbing alcohol, and now it should stick a lot. There we go, got it wrapped 8 times, which gave us 4/100ths of an inch on each side, a total of 8/100ths of an inch overall larger. And I just gotta make sure I don't sand off more than that much material, which I think that's just about the right amount. Okay, here we go. This I'm gonna trace with a thick pencil, because the first step to cutting is going to be on the bandsaw, and I want to cut this roughly a millimeter wider, so that way when I get to the router bit with this flush trim, I'm only taking off about 1 millimeter. And I'm going to give myself a little space in case I mess up. I can make another one. That's the beauty of using some MDF for this. In case I press the router bit into this too much and it pushes in and creates a divot, we'll have a little bit of recovery there. I also have a full sheet in case I need it. And again, you might be asking yourself, why don't you just buy some shims from, there's a shim company, I'll send a link in the description. You can do that, and it's gonna be easier, but you gotta grind them anyway. So I figure if you're gonna grind it, I mean, it's just one extra step to cut out with the bandsaw if you have one. And then you can choose any material you want. You could even use like a cool, like acrylic pour and something that gives a little style to your rifle. You got the trace cut out. It wanted to cave in on me, so that's why you can kind of see I drew several times, because I wanted to make sure I had a fat enough line. I'm gonna cut it based on the outside of that. Now these holes in the bottom are 1/4 inch, so I have a 1/4 inch drill bit that I'm gonna basically hold this down. I'm gonna drill one in. I'm gonna affix that with one of those factory bolts with a screw on the other side, and then I'm going to drill the other one. You don't wanna do those both at the same time because they can move around on you. So you're gonna do one, screw it down, and then do the other. Got one side through, and then I did counterbore on the other side to fit the nut in there so that this can still be flush, because when we're routering this is gonna be on the table like so. I had to use some washers to space it for that bolt length so the bolt didn't protrude, but that'll still line up. I'll just raise the router bit up a little bit higher. Okay, so here's the flush trim router bit. I just wanna show you how that's gonna work. This bearing is gonna follow that surface that I want it to cut to. And this blade down here is now gonna cut this surface to match. Now the other way to do it is with a router bushing set, and I do have a spiral bit router bit, which is it's gonna put a better finish cut on it if I use this, but you have to go at least 1/8 of an inch over to compensate for the size of the collet. So I just didn't want to get into hand sanding 1/8 of an inch of material down, because I just don't think it's going to be as precise. I'm trying to just stay within a few 100ths of an inch, and that's going to make the sanding process a lot easier and keep the size of it more precise. So I got that bit set up. You could see, I guess I got to go back here and zoom in. That bearing is going to follow the tape, or I guess where the tape is over the pad, and then it's going to cut this wood down. Okay, there we go. Let's give it a fit test. Nice. So it's over a little bit. You can kind of see there's a couple spots, if you look up close, where I'm pressing this bearing into a soft surface. It was quite challenging. So there's a couple spots that are indented a little there. You could see it there and there. I'm gonna sand those out, and I'll probably be down to maybe 300s over on each side once I get smooth, but I want this template piece to be perfectly smooth so that when I throw that carbon in there, it has an exact copy to replicate. Here we go, got it all sanded up. I have, I don't know, I'm feeling the other side's about equal. Just a couple hundredths of an inch to sand off. Boy, I could stain that and it would look good. That would do the job. But sometimes I get a little overkill. So let's, that carbon fiber will show up on Thursday, and we'll go ahead and get to go cutting that and finalizing the job. There it is. After, I think, 3 weeks of waiting, the hand-laid glow-in-the-dark carbon arrived from the Netherlands. So I'm gonna do something fun with this. Now, I know I didn't need to spend another $100, but it was just too nice of a rifle to not take care of like that. So this side's all nice and roughed up. I'm gonna go ahead and run this smooth, pretty side through my drum sander there, because what I'm gonna do after I do that is take it over to my bandsaw. I'm gonna cut it into equal thirds and then laminate it, because right now if I cut the buttstock out of this, I'm just gonna get stripes. But if I cut this into thirds and stack it, then this is the side that will be on the outside of the rifle, and it'll have some blending into these glow-in-the-dark layers. It'll look really cool. So I'm just gonna run this through my drum sander with 120 grit so it holds epoxy well, because I'm gonna use a JB Weld epoxy and it needs to be roughed up for that. This side already looks pretty good. Goodbye, shiny pretty stuff. That should do it. I went ahead and ran just some scrap wood stock through there to test it, and it all did fine as long as I ran it really slow and let those teeth go where they don't go naturally. It's very easy if you push through a bandsaw for that blade to kink one way or the other and wander in your piece. You gotta go extremely slow. All right, if you're a patient guy, this project is worth doing. If you're not, don't even bother. You can see here, it took me 30 minutes to make 2 cuts. Trying to preserve as much of this as possible because I do want to have a 5/8 inch spacer. And it's actually a little bigger than 5/8 each. I'm about 0.69. I'm gonna run them through the drum sander, make them all the same before we go ahead and laminate. Drum sander made very quick work of that. And this is gonna be my new layout. This used to be on the side, right? And so this was gonna be basically on the inside of the stock, and you'd miss all that prettiness. Now, it's gonna be on the side of the stock like this, and when we cut that shape, we're gonna get a lot more of that orange. I think it was totally worth it. All right, I wiped them down with acetone, and I'm using the original JB Weld. I think it's their strongest one, and since we're using a black top layer in between these, I'm not worried about it being dark. You can go ahead and get that clear stuff, but I also like how this stuff takes a little while longer to set up, gives you more working time. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get these together. I'm gonna use these 2 pieces on the top and the bottom to keep them parallel to each other so they don't squish around. I'll use a clamp on that, and then I'll squeeze them, spagoosh them together like that. And of course, the perfect paintbrush for JB Weld is a deck screw. So we'll get this together, and tomorrow should be a sandwich of yummy carbon stock material. This is just too satisfying to not record. The goosh, spagoosh. Okay, I have every clamp I can fit on there to align it and to hold it together nice and tight. And we're gonna check on that tomorrow morning. Okay, I'm gonna take the chisel and just pop these pieces of wood off, and then we'll get on to the next step. Okay, this is ready to clean up here. I'm gonna run this through the drum sander so that it's flush and parallel. And then you can see here, this is the original butt pad. It has this little inset, I guess, I don't know. This is supposed to keep it centered on the rifle, basically. And so Once I get this cut out, I'm gonna have to trace that on here and I'm gonna Dremel that out. But for the side that goes into the rifle, I want it to do the same thing. And I could cut into this material, but then I'm shortening the thickness of my spacer. So what I'm gonna do is wrap this with tape and I'm gonna fill it with epoxy, and then I'll basically router into the epoxy that way with a 1/8 inch offset flush trim bit. All right, that came out nice and smooth. Wanted to level those up so we don't have any weird uneven edges once I get this finished. All right, I put about, I don't know, 1/8 to 1/4 inch of JB Weld in there. I'll let that set up for another 16 hours before I throw it in the drum sander, smooth it out, and then we'll have something to work with. All right, here's one side, there's the other. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in the drum sander and smooth it out, and then we're gonna get to drawing the contour on here and cutting it on the band. Got that plane down with the drum sander, and you can see that layer on top of the carbon. That should be just enough. That's what I'll cut out the insert for the gun stock to hold it still. Yeah, I traced my outline with a thick pencil so that I can cut my bandsaw to the outer edge of that, and it gives me just enough room to use my flush trim router bit and get that shape on there. All right, there it is. And remember, that orientation of these stripes used to be on the outside, which I didn't want to just be looking at this on the side of the rifle. So now you can start to see what we're going to be looking at. Now I have to trim that down. It looks like we're actually going to get quite a bit of orange, which I think is going to be really awesome. Let me know what you guys think it's going to look like in the comments. And this is going to be night and day different here in a little bit. Okay, I have a self-centering drill bit. I have this template piece centered where I want it. I made sure to get the right amount of orange, hopefully equal or close to equal amounts on each side. And I use this, it's just gonna pilot it. It's not gonna get all the way through, but it's gonna start that pilot, and then I can take the template off and I'll have my pilot holes that I can push all the way through and counterbore this from the opposite side. And then I can put this back on and do the full 1/4 inch. Okay, I'm using one of my cheaper Forstner bits because this project so far has dulled every tool I've used on it. And this is a 3/4 inch. I'm going to counter bore that just enough to get the head of that screw in, because these need to be bolted together while I'm routering them. Okay, goes just past the head. That's what I need. I'm going to do the other side now. Okay, going to use my drill press on low speed here and just get it through that hole. That drill gets up for the task. Really slow on the exit so I don't tear out too bad. All right, so I want to make sure these holes line up perfectly. So I used my center finding hole to find and line up those pilots, and then bolted it down on this end to hold it still. And then I'm going to use this side of the template to guide where I should put the 1/4 inch bit, and that should push it all the way through in the right spot. Okay, there we go. And I'm actually gonna wrap this template with a little bit of masking tape. I do think we can go a little bit wider. Wouldn't hurt. I'd rather sand off a little more than be too short after sanding. Starting to take form here. I'm really liking this. So time to start sanding it. We'll get the wet sanding going, and that should make this look really pretty. All right, for the rough sanding, you can see I've got some marks that the router left I want to get rid of. I'm going to use my HEPA back on my upside down finish sander, and I'm going to use 120 grit just to kind of get it. You can kind of see once I get close to the edge of the wood there, I gotta be careful. But I'm gonna use this because that's gonna give you a really nice, even, and very fast way to get this down to where I want it to be in terms of the profile. And then I'm gonna switch to wet sandpaper and go through. Before I do the final finish on this, I wanna rabbit this material out so that I don't damage any of this. And so there's a white side rabbiting bit set. It also has a flush trim I could have used, but I don't want to use this nice one on carbon. I just don't want to dull it. And the epoxy is a lot softer than the carbon, so no big deal. So I'm going to start with an 1/8 inch, and you have these different size washers to give you the offset that you need. And we'll see if 1/8 inch gets me to where I need to be. If not, I can go to 3/16. Getting close, guys. I ended up going to a 3/16, and it's still a little bit too big, so I'm gonna have to take a 1/4 inch off of there. But it's good to go a 1/16 at a time so it doesn't grab and tear out your material anymore. Okay, moment of truth. That'll work. And I just remembered one last thing. I need, so we have this to go into the stock, but I need to be able to recess this old butt pad into here. Now I could be lazy and just cut this material out, but then what if we get a sloppy butt pad? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this apart and I'm gonna wrap it into this MDF on this side over here actually. And then I'm gonna put it back together and I'm gonna fill that with JB Weld, tape it up, let it sit overnight. One more day, guys. And then we're gonna go ahead and finish it tomorrow. Okay, so I didn't wanna have to redo all that sanding that I did earlier, so I went ahead and taped off that first layer of carbon so that the epoxy does not get on there. And now what I'm gonna do is start filling this with epoxy and putting tape on to hold it. Okay, so just filling that channel, and it should stick to the template, which is totally fine. And it should stick to the inside of the new spacer, which is totally fine, but it should not stick to the side. And then we can just flush trim that off the same way we did everything else. All right, I pulled the tape that was covering this part last night before this hardened all the way, and that way it was easy to get off. So now I have a smooth bearing surface. I'm gonna pull these bolts and then we'll flush trim this epoxy. Should match up. Then we gotta cut this template off. All right, coming along, I ended up using the power sander all the way to a 3. Getting there. Gonna use a chisel, just try to chisel that MDF out of there and make it nice and flush inside. Okay, got that all finished off with the Dremel, and I ended up opening it up a little bit more, so this fits like just snugly right in there. And now to the wet sanding. Once and for all. Just kidding, guys, not ready to do the final sanding. I'm actually gonna bore out some of this material. Carbon fiber is not, I mean, it's light when it's thin like this, but that piece of carbon weighs quite a bit more than a piece of wood. And I think the benefit that comes from carbon is it's so strong, you can make it super thin. And that's what I'm gonna go for here. I'm gonna try to make this guy thinned out enough that we lose a good chunk, maybe even half that weight. Finally, bored out, ready to wet sand, finally. And it's significantly lighter. Okay, got that down to a 3000 grit. Looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and throw some polish on there, so just some wax, get a nice sheen to it, and then it'll be ready to finally go on the rifle. There it is. Waxed up and shiny, time to get this on the rifle. Telekill. Brah. There you go, guys. I will never lose my rifle in the dark again. I love it. You hit the light, Reed? Yep. That's a winner. All right, guys. Well, I hope you liked that one. I know it was quite different than most of my other videos, but if you did like it, please give me a thumbs up. If you have questions about it, or if you just want to comment on what you think. Like, do you like this? Should I have gone with black? What do you guys think? Either way, it won't hurt my feelings. I'm glad I won't lose my rifle. And thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Take care.